This is the ABQ Business Podcast with your host, Jason Rigby. Each week we'll interview visionary business leaders to inspire the creative power and spirit that's in every entrepreneur. Discussing strengths, weaknesses, strategies, systems, and the problems we can all solve together for a new future for local small business.
Hello, everyone. Super excited for today's show. This is going to be extremely practical show. We're going to talk about leadership. And I know my leadership podcasts are always my highest downloaded. In fact, I did a leadership podcast a while back and it broke a record. So I know this is going to be an amazing show for you today. We're going to get extremely practical, and we have a leader in leadership. We have Dr. Kevin Gazzara. He has spent over 25 years in management and leadership. And in fact, he managed in 1989 to 2007 Intel's first line Managing Through People program and LTP. And we're going to get into that. And you're going to hear an amazing story about bringing all different types of cultures all around the world, getting them together and having them effectively manage and lead. So if you have managers in your organization, we're going to get into that leadership. Then Dr. Gazzara came up with some things that if you're leaving corporate America and you're coming in to be an entrepreneur and start your business, some leadership tips and guidelines for that. Dr. Gazzara, I am super excited. It's been a while since we began going back and forth, and I know you've had to cancel, then I've had to cancel, and we're with family emergencies and such, but we're here, and I'm super excited to have you on the show today.
Well, thanks so much, Jason. I'm glad to be here. I'm glad to help your audience kind of get to the next step and share some of my success stories with them, and also probably some of my failures, because I think you learn as much as a leader from your failures as you do with your successes.
Yes, sir. And I want to get into, let's start from Intel, because I think that is really interesting story. It's 1989. And I know you were working for Intel. Did they come to you and say, hey, we want you to spearhead this program?
Oh, boy, I wish it was that easy. So my transition was just before I went into Intel, I'd spent 10 years with a company called Transamerica de Laval, who became IMO Industries and ultimately was bought by Siemens. So I lived in this very unusual world. My background is a dual degree in engineering and business from Drexel University. And when I got out of school, I went to work for this company. They just called themselves de Laval, 100-year-old company, made custom compressors, steam turbines, pumps, things that were, $1 to $5 million. So very, very custom. You needed an engineering background. And I did lots and lots of that work, which seems like, well, why the hell would Intel be interested in me after doing that? So great place to learn. I had terrific managers, also had some pretty terrible managers there, but mostly terrific managers and leaders. And I learned so much from them. And then in about the mid 80s, the director for advertising and promotion left. And they said to me, hey, Kevin, so I was a marketing manager at the time. And they said, hey, you're a pretty creative guy. I'm a musician and I love doing video and that kind of stuff. Can you help us do some videos? So back in 89, I got involved in helping Transamerica create industrial videos and films for promotion of their products. And I found I really liked it. And I was actually pretty good at it. So by 1980, the end of 88, beginning 89, I had significant expertise in computers, computer graphics, writing scripts, hiring actors, doing filming. I lived up in Philadelphia area at the time. We'll go to New York to do the video editing and audio editing. So it was really pretty fast moving. And in 1989, if anybody can remember back that far, we had 286, Intel 286 computers that were running at 6.7 megahertz, not gigahertz, so they're running, 1,000 times slower than your iPhone is running at the moment. And they bought a division in Princeton, New Jersey at David Sarnoff Labs. They bought the team. Intel went in and essentially made a purchase for the digital video technology. It was called DVI, Digital Video Interactive. and they were ramping up quickly. So they brought this team in of 36, and the goal was to ramp to about 90 within the year. And there were very few people that had both. They wanted somebody with an MBA, which I had. They wanted somebody who had done product development, which I had. I had set up a whole new business. So business development for Transamerica, I had that. But I also had the video and the computer knowledge that most people did not. So I would have been attractive to them. Now, here's where it kind of gets interesting. Hopefully this is not too boring for your listeners. So I saw an ad. They used to run ads in the past for jobs right before you could go on the internet. And so I remember opening up the newspaper, looking at an ad in the Philadelphia Inquirer, and there was an ad that had been written custom for me. Everything I had, and they were looking for a product manager for Intel for this new division. And since I was living in probably 30 miles from Princeton, this was perfect for me. So I sent them my resume because I knew I was the right person for that position. And I went in Monday morning, and I told my administrative assistant, we used to call them secretaries at the time, to book me a flight to San Francisco. I was going to go visit one of our distributors out there. And I said, leave it open. I don't know when I'm going to come back. So the following Monday, I jumped on a flight, went out there. And when I landed in San Francisco airport, I called Intel and I said to the recruiter, I just flew in from Princeton area. I am here to interview for the position. I've done it unsolicited. I know you're going to get 1,000 resumes for this position, but I'm the right hire. And if you don't want to interview me, I'm going to come and sit in your lobby. So,
awesome.
So in fact, HR used to use my story as kind of the type of people that you would want. So fortunately, the recruiter said, okay, all right, well, we'll interview you. Come down tomorrow afternoon at 4:00 and we'll interview you. So I drove down, went to my distributor first. And then after we were done at 4:00, I went down to Intel, and I had a 1-hour interview with the recruiter. And it's I'd say probably the most terrible interview of my entire life. It couldn't have gone worse. And the reason was this recruiter because they're doing all the recruiting out of Santa Clara, this recruiter had only hired chip designers. Mm-hmm. And although I had done chip design and digital design in my undergraduate work, I had not been in that industry. So I was coming in from a different industry. So fortunately what he did is he interviewed me, and he picked up the phone and called the GM back in Princeton and said, hey, there's a guy that lives there, but he flew out here and I didn't pay for him, right? They were worried about, I didn't pay. He just kind of showed up out of nowhere. And here's his resume. Do you want to still talk to him? He's a little bit nuts. I mean, I don't know why he flew out here, but he said, that's the only way he's going to get differentiated. And the GM said, well, of course, he meets everything on the scope of the ad that we put in. So he said, yes, send him in. So I went in, I interviewed with the entire staff. And when I got to the last person, the VP that was running it, there were 8 people I had to interview with. And when I got to the 8th person, who was the VP kind of running the whole show in Princeton, he looked at my resume. I walked in, he was reading this massive contract with IBM they're about ready to sign. And he read he looked at my resume, and he looked at me and he said, what position are you here? Because it was a revolving door. They're trying to hire, 75 people within 12 months. So he was doing these interviews regular, 1 or 2 a day. And I said, for the product manager position, and I'll never forget, his name was Bob Brennan, awesome guy. And he takes off his reading glasses and he looks at me, and to be politically correct, I'll just say kind of what he said. And he said, and this is within the first minute of him meeting me, he said, this job would effing kill you. So at that point, after I had 7 out of 8 convinced that I was a good hire, I'm thinking, oh, this is not going the way that I wanted to go. So, so you have to be fast on your feet. So I took off my reading glasses and I said, well, Bob, I have to be honest with you. This interview is not going quite the way I had expected. And then he just cracked up and then he said, let me explain what I mean. He said, I'm looking for someone that has this level of legal knowledge on contracts, et cetera, et cetera. He says, I have no doubt that you can do this job, but he says it would be a disservice to you. We have positions for you. And then he sent me over to the product marketing guy, and he ultimately hired me.
That's amazing. So he knew exactly what he was looking for, and then he was able to right then in that moment. I mean, he knew the minute that he looked at your resume, he was like, I know you're seeing what we put out there in the newspaper, but in reality, this is what it's going to be.
Yeah, and to give you the follow up, within about 2.5, 3 years, I did move into the product manager position, right, which was perfect because I came in as a customer marketing engineer, which is the right thing to do, so I could learn everything. I could learn Intel, I could learn the systems, and then I was ready to do that. So kudos to Bob for recognizing good talent and then ultimately giving me the opportunity. So in very long about way, but hopefully interesting to your listeners. So I started in February 17th, 1989. I started at Intel. Second worst day of my life. I got in there. They had I had 30-minute orientation and then a 3-hour staff meeting for a big trade show they're getting ready to do in 2 weeks. And they handed out all of the agenda, and my name was splattered all over it. And they spoke in acronyms. And I remember calling my wife at noon and saying, because I didn't understand a single word that they said, we have to take these ARs to get the DMP over to the DVI before we, implement it into the bus system. And then they're just talking and I'm listening and I'm thinking, so I remember calling my wife on a landline in those days. I said, this may not have been the best choice. Ultimately, it did. So I started on the technical side. I came into marketing, moved to product management, moved to operations management. Ultimately, ran the small division, got to close that down. Went on to do other technical stuff. But the cool thing about Intel is every 7 years, Intel gives you an 8-week sabbatical. And that's for a refresh. And while I was doing the technical stuff, I had started as part of being a manager. You were expected to teach. So I started teaching a lot of the management leadership courses. And the person running Intel University for all of the world for Intel said, hey, I know that you have a passion for this. You're pretty good at that. You get really good scores. When you come back from sabbatical, would you consider, making that shift, what all my engineer buddies say, over to the dark side, right? Come over here to HR and you can work in the management leadership development area. So I made that shift. It was a great shift. And I really spent the last 10 years of my life in that world before I retired.
So, Intel is known. I mean, there's been books written on, management and, I know the CEO has, a New York Times bestseller book out there on it. I think it's High Output. Is it High Output Managers?
Right. Andy Grove, I was fortunate to be able to work a little bit with Andy. Probably one of the most brilliant guys I'd ever worked with and met. Not only knew the business side, knew the technical side, really driving guy, but really had a great heart and was a visionary, certainly. So he's written a couple of books. The High Output Management was the first one I had read. Certainly read that right before I went in for the interview. And then the other one that I think was also a New York Times bestseller was called Only the Paranoid Survived. Both, even today, are fantastic books to read if you're interested to think about or learn about innovative leadership.
Yeah, because I kind of want to correlate, Dr. Gazzara, if you don't mind, with you managing through people the MTP program that you led and the Leading Through People LTB program, because there's almost some correlations with what's happening now and businesses having employees throughout the world. I mean, we're outsourcing so much. We have, all different types of cultures that we're dealing with. I mean, just our company alone, we have multiple employees in the Philippines, in India, in Pakistan, in South America. And I know you had a situation that you had to get these managers from all these different cultures, together to be able to teach Intel Corporation.
Yeah, it was a great challenge. So, Jason, the Managing Through People program, which used to be called First Line Manager program, was what we called a residential program. We would take anywhere between 100 to 126 managers off-site because we wanted to get them away from the work environment for a full 5 days. They would fly in or drive in, depending on where they were, on Sunday, and they would leave on Friday afternoon. And it was a total immersion environment, right, where we ran them through everything imaginable that you would want a first line manager to learn about, dealing with different personalities, different cultures, how do you deal with conflict, how do you hold people accountable. I mean, all the types of things. If you went down any management book, it would say a good manager does these type of things. And we ran that program actually started just when I had arrived. I took it as a participant in 1993. And then I just fell in love with it, and it ran all the way up to the year that I retired from Intel in 2007. And it was a great program. It got the behavioral change, and it was the highest rated Intel program year after year after year. And the interesting thing is when I left, because Intel had a great learning management system, what we found was that when I left in June of 2007 to start my own company, Magna Leadership, with my two Intel colleagues, we had just finished training our 40,000th manager. And we used to train about 2,500 managers in anywhere between 7 to 10 different countries. And I just fell in love with the program. So when they were doing the redesign, or the enhanced design, I should say, in 2000, I was on the committee, and I had an opportunity to go and move from managing Intel University for the U.S. to actually managing that residential program. And I just jumped at that. That was kind of my vision of where I wanted to be.
So 45,000 managers you trained. I mean, your team and you trained. That is amazing. What are, out of those 45,000, because we have business leaders that are listening to the podcast, and I was talking, this is so interesting. I was talking to a CEO the other day, and they were talking about the difference between leadership and management, and understanding that and being a good leader if you're a mid-manager person, or you're just coming into management. What are some of the key takeaways that you learned after training these 45,000 managers that made a good manager?
Yeah, well, I'm going to correct you. It's actually 40,000. I don't want to exagerate here.
Oh, okay, 40.
So
Okay.
we're going to stick with 40 plus or minus, right? One of the things when I started teaching, I also at Intel, I also decided that I had a fantastic mentor, and she said, let's put a 10-year plan together, because ultimately when you retire or leave the corporate world, you should be ready. So I started in 1996 actually teaching at the University of Phoenix. One of my staff members was teaching there, and she just begged me incessantly, like, oh, you have to come and teach. You'd be great there. And since ultimately I wanted to move into academia when I retired, that made good sense. So I started teaching at the university, which also I recognized, hey, I need to go back and get some additional credentials here. And that's when I went back and did my doctorate in organizational leadership and management. But to get to your question about the difference, management is, from a very simplistic perspective, is really about kind of managing things, right? And leaders is about, leading people, right? That's the big difference. And also, I'd say management has a tendency to have more of a tactical focus, and leadership has more of a strategic focus. So, the management program that we did, the Managing Through People program, had much more of a tactical focus with just enough sprinklings of leadership in there, so that as they move from first line to middle manager program, Intel defined mid managers as managers of managers. Then they would go and take the Leading Through People program, the LTP, which we didn't design until 2005, and that's another story that I can tell you if you have an interest.
Yeah, no. Whenever so you're looking at managers in and of themselves, and it's strategizing and understanding and managing things. Then you have this program where it's managing managers. So now you're dealing with leadership and you're dealing with people. When you look at leadership, especially in today's climate, because I know a lot has changed from 1989. I think leadership principles are probably timeless, a lot of them. But
They are.
Yeah, what are some of the things that you're seeing? And I know, especially with what's going on with COVID and all that, and we can talk about that here in a little bit. But what are some of the things that you're seeing in leadership that has kind of surprised you, or are changes that you're seeing, that may be either for the worse or for the better?
Well, I'd say probably the biggest surprise, and I think it's been really re-emphasized through the remoteness that COVID has driven us to, is the need for being able to manage or lead remotely, the recognition of the importance of face-to-face time and relationships with individuals, and by not being in the same room with them or the same area, that it's added some additional challenges. And I would imagine yourself, as well as many of the people listening, there's just a different feel when you're sitting across the table or on a couch together and having a conversation in a very open environment, certainly without masks, versus having it on Zoom or through the telephone and so forth. And the good news is, I always believe that there's always gifts in any of the challenges that we get. So I think one of the gifts has been that we've seen with the leaders is they've recognized the importance of relationships more. They've recognized the importance of spending the time with people, and really value when they do have the time to be face to face or mask to mask at the moment. So I think that's particularly since I'm what I call a recovering engineer. So I'm a techie nerd, and I love technology. I've got 6 computers running here right in my office at the moment, all simultaneously for lots of different reasons. And I think technical managers, particularly when I do executive coaching for, technical experts who are also managers, is that the people thing, and recognizing that it's not just technology that moves you forward. You certainly have to have that, but the determination on the level of success of a team, of a product launch, of a new strategic initiative, is significantly more dependent on the humans and the relationship and the trust that you have. And I think that's what I've seen the pandemic has brought to the surface. And that's really a gift for people like myself and my team that do management and leadership development, as well as the coaching.
Yeah, I watched a documentary the other day, and it's an older one with the lady that was the CEO of that company, and she was misleading people, but Thanos or something like that.
Oh yes. Yeah. I think Theranos, is it
Yes,
Theranos?
Theranos. Yes, sir. Yeah. And she, here she is, a tech CEO, a leader. She's kind of doing, Einstein's thing where, let's fake it till we make it, I've got 4 years, so I think she even called the machine Einstein. So I think she kind of copied his, but it was amazing the amount of trust that she built. I mean, and these are, diplomats and politicians and leaders. I mean, she's seen with the president at the time, the vice president, and I mean, just the amount of trust people had for her, and for people to follow her. And I know this is a negative example, but whenever you see this technical aspect and these tech leaders, especially when you look at Silicon Valley, or you saw it when you were with Intel, and you see it now. Like what are like vision? She was very visionary. Like she was always giving out vision. What are some of the things that you see as a CEO, or as a leader, especially in the tech industry, that can help leaders? Because we always look to, we always look to these, leaders as kind of somebody that's like demigods. Like we could never be like them. These leadership skills. There's only a few people in the world that are visionaries and can execute and get things done. But to me, it's just kind of. I mean, some people are natural born leaders. I get that, but to me, it's kind of. Is it? Do you think leadership is skills, technical skills learned?
Well, I think it's both. I think that that leaders, there are certain leaders that are born with certain skills or talents and characteristics. And I think what you're talking about, Jason, is really what would, if you had to put them in a category, would be the charismatic leaders.
Right.
So, and people that have that charisma, we do know there's lots of really good behavioral research that shows that people are drawn to them, right? Because one, they aspire to be able to have that presence in front. The challenge has been, which I think we've seen in just over and over and over again in the past several years, has been that if you don't couple the charisma with authenticity and values, then what happens is you get this conflicted brain of the followers trying to figure out whether that you're truly a leader that they want to follow or not. So the Theranos scenario, I think, is a great one as an example. It's, when you don't have good intentions, where you're a little bit, I don't know if you call it amoral, but where you have hidden agendas, right, that are financially driven. And, finances get in the way of lots and lots of leaders doing the right thing. The real leaders are the ones that make the hard decisions that have an impact, right? That really impact the bottom line. One of the examples we used to use when I taught organizational behavior was the Tylenol, like Johnson & Johnson, right? I think they pulled all the time when there was a Tylenol problem where people were putting cyanide in it and people were dying from it. They could have done something else, and they said, no, we're pulling it all off, right? And it was whatever, $800 million hit. Intel did the same thing. There's a great case study. People may not know, but in Intel there was a flaw that was somebody found in, I think, the very first Pentium chip back in the 90s, that if you calculated the digits out, I think it was the 27th digit, that because of the flaw in the chip, chip A would say it was a 7 and chip B would say it was an 8. And why you probably wouldn't think, well, that's not how big of a problem is that 27 digits out? What it said is there was a problem with the design and the processes, and it had to get fixed, particularly if those chips are being used on, critical medical or financial decisions. You don't want everybody's bank account off by 10 cents or 7 cents for 800 million people, right? That's a big hit on any of the big banks. So so the leadership has to be authentic, has to be values driven, in order for it to stick, have some longevity, and really drive an organization. But at the same time, you have to have the people that get the day-to-day work done.
Yep.
You can't just do all the visionary stuff. You need both managers and leaders. Sometimes, like with Andy Grove, you get that in the same person. But many times we've had other CEOs that I've worked with, or even at Intel, who were exceptional managers and they were not as good leaders, or they were exceptional leaders and they were terrible managers. And the best ones recognized one thing, is they recognized their strengths and weaknesses. And they said, hey, I'm good at this. Let me do this. And you're good at this. I'm going to bring you on as a partner, essentially. And when we go do talks or make decisions or whatever, I'm going to defer to you in the areas that you have that strength and I have that weakness. And we're going to do this together.
Yeah, it sounds like self-awareness,
It is. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And how important is that in leadership?
Well, boy, I can't tell you how many emotional intelligence assessments that we do. We work with Target Training International, and we do lots of behavioral assessments like DISC and values, and leadership assessments as well as EQ, emotional intelligence. Really, that is probably even more important than the skills. I mean, you have to be able to develop trust by demonstrating competence, right? So you have to have competence. It's the reason that it's very difficult to bring someone in that only knows finance, to run a tech company or a manufacturing company or whatever. They know how to manipulate the numbers, but you have to be able to talk to the people and get the buy-in from them so that you get that discretionary work out of them.
No, that makes sense. And so whenever, whenever I'm looking at self-awareness and I see, and like you say, somebody, and usually there's another word that goes with it is humility, and you were saying whenever you see someone that says, hey, I know my strengths here, I know my weakness here, I've took 100 tests, they all tell me the same thing, this is where I'm at. How, because this is a problem, that I've had as a leader. How vulnerable do you get with your team? How do you do you think it's wise to share your weaknesses and strengths to your team? There's always this, how close do I get to the people that I work with? Do I stay and am I formal? Do I share these things when it comes to communication, self-awareness, humility, those things, and trying, because I think a lot of leaders have a good heart and they're really trying, especially now, like with COVID and everything, and people are fearful and they're afraid, now more than ever, we need good leaders. How would you talk about like communication with your team?
Well, I'll tell you what I would, my conversation with any of my new hires when I was at Intel, my very first day, the very first meeting after we hired them, whether it was an internal hire that they're coming from another division or another organization, or it was an external hire that we've hired, a new college grad or from another company, I had a conversation that contained two elements to, I think, address kind of the areas that you're going through, Jason, you're looking for, Jason. The first thing I would say to them is you will not be working for me 18 months from now. So that was a little bit of a shock factor. And then I would tell them, here's the reason, that the very first day is I want you to be acting as a leader, and the best way for you to excel so that 18 months from now, that I want people poaching you from my organization because I want to develop you as a leader. And the way to do that is you need to be thinking at my level. You need to be delivering at your level, and you need to be thinking at my level. And if you can do that, by the time you move in 18 months into the next level, and my goal was to make myself as replaceable by as many people on my staff as possible, which a lot of other people thought was a little bit nuts. And they said, well, why would you want to do that? If you're replaceable, then you're going to be replaced and you could be out of a job. And I said, well, I look at it from a different perspective. If I'm replaceable and somebody else wants to offer me a position, and I probably had about 10 positions in the 18 years I was at Intel, 10 different positions. If I am replaceable, that means one, it's an opportunity for hopefully for one of my staff that's been developed. And two, it's usually for a better opportunity for myself. So why would I not want that? So you have to get comfortable. You have to get confident. You have to get trained and develop, right? Certainly, so you have the skills to be able to do that. And the only way, as we kind of circle around here, is that you have to have that self-awareness and you have to be vulnerable. You have to be able to say, hey, I don't know everything, right? I'm not great at everything. And there's certain things that I love to do that I'm going to get better at. And the other stuff, I'm going to get to a level that's acceptable, a baseline, and then I'll let the other people excel at that. And you pointed to a very good point, of a good starting point, which is communication, right? Dr. Ali Lakhani, who was one of my business partners when we started up our firm, and he and I worked together at Intel. He was also one of my doctoral students, so I got to know him on two different levels. Brilliant guy. And Dr. Lakhani actually developed an assessment. He's a statistician as well as having lots and lots of other degrees and so forth. But he loves statistics and big data analysis. And he developed the only leadership assessment that quantitatively and is statistically validated. It shows cause and effect, correlational relationships for leaders on 10 different scales for 70 countries. And what you pointed out so aptly is if you look at that, all 70 countries, the tip for the leaders listening, all 70 countries have communication as the number one kind of leverage point. If you want to get better as a leader, if you want to do nothing else, whether you're talking about competence or authenticity or empowerment or lots of the other 10 factors, get better at communication, and you will be viewed as a better leader. But you have to be able to say to yourself, I'm good at this and I suck at this, and I'm going to go get help. I'm going to go get help with people. And that's kind of what we tried to do at Intel. Let's give you access from the experts for the technical experts who were also managers and leaders to help them so that they could do more of what they were exceptional at.
Yeah, that's amazing that communication was number one. I want to get into before we get into helping people moving from corporate to becoming an entrepreneur, and I want to talk to you about that. But I kind of want to get into it for a few minutes, if you don't mind. One of the things I realized when COVID hit back in March of 2020 was the level of leader that I thought I was compared to when a crisis hit, what I actually was probably 3 or 4 points down. I would say I was a 7 or 8, and then I turned into like a 4 really quick. When crisis hits, when COVID hits, and even now we're still going through all this insecurity and fear and paranoia and all these things that followers and your team is facing on these external pressures. How, as a leader, what are you seeing when you see a crisis or when you see something like with COVID?
Well, there's really two types of leaders that I think have emerged. The ones that have that level of self-awareness, that emotional intelligence, self-awareness, and the other ones that have an ability to react quickly and just power through. Right. Mm-hmm. So I'm not. There might be another category, but those are the two categories I think that show up. And the ones with the self-awareness take a pause, they reflect, they bring in other perspectives, and then they move forward in a more strategic or a more proactive way than a reactive way. The other leaders who are usually quite good at firefighting know how to put the things in place and so forth. The challenge is they don't do it from a systemic perspective where they're putting a good systems in place. The analogy I use is the whack-a-mole, right? I'm figuring out, I'm going to practice whacking the mole, and then I'm going to figure out how to get a bigger hammer, and then I'm going to gain more points. That's the firefighting one. The other one says, hey, let's talk about how we can get that damn whack-a-mole machine unplugged.
Yes.
So that's the difference between, tactics and strategy. And I think those are and if you think about it for yourself, if you had a leader to follow, which of those would you want to do? You may need the whack-a-mole leader in the very short term, right? It's the old Covey principle or the statement, which I love from Stephen Covey, is sometimes it's hard to remember you're there to drain the swamp when you're up to your ass in alligators. Sometimes you have to have the alligator hunter, first. And the problem is that many of the managers and leaders think that once they've gotten the alligators out, that they need to train significantly more on alligator removal. And the best strategic managers recognize, hey, let's figure out how to not let these alligators in the swamp, and then I don't have to deal with that.
No, I love that. That's such a great analogy. I want to get into, for our remaining minutes, if you don't mind, I want to get into helping leaders that are transitioning from, maybe the corporation, side of things, or maybe they're starting a new business, or entrepreneurs that are, that have small businesses. Because I know you had told me you had some things for that, and so can we get into a little bit of that transition and what that looks like?
Sure, I'd be glad to. And I'll try to do it quickly because I think we only have, about 10 or 15 minutes left?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So before I left the corporate world, left Intel after 18 years, and I had a personal goal. I had a great mentor. If people don't have mentors or coaches, that's the first thing you have to do. We put a 10-year plan together. So it wasn't, so 1997, I left in 2007. And I wanted to retire right about the time I was 50. And to go do the same thing I did for Intel to help other organizations, we've been able to do it over the last 14 years, help them develop, multi-million-dollar leadership programs for people that don't have that kind of budget, right? So we typically work with smaller to medium-sized companies. We also work with some departments within larger organizations like, Cisco or Qualcomm, and we've done quite a bit of work with different cities and so forth, but we don't do it at an enterprise level. That's not our expertise, and it usually takes too much time to try to convince a 50,000 person company to move in this direction. We want to get in, help, and kind of build really good leadership, both at first, midline, and senior management. But so before we left, I talked to 15 different consultants who had developed businesses that were over $1 million or $1 to $10 million. And I wanted to know, what did they do? What should I do before I leave the corporate world? And there were 5 key components that came out of my discussions. And then since that time, I've added a 6th, which I'll tell you at the end. So the first component that they told me you needed what they called a shtick, something unique that really differentiated you, right? So you can't be just a leadership consultant or just an executive. You have to focus in a certain area. So it has to be unique. The second thing that they said you need a presence. You need a social presence, out there. So when people Google you, right, that you show up. And I would encourage people to Google me. I haven't done it recently, but typically I get tens of thousands of hits. Right, that really demonstrates some kind of authenticity, hopefully, and definition of success. The third thing they said is you have to have enough money banked to not make any money for 18 to 24 months. They said, if you really want to be an entrepreneur, start up a business, you have to be willing to say for 18 to 24 months that you are investing in yourself and the business. And if you get money, if you get contracts that come in, and our first big contract didn't come in until month 19. So that 18-month conference call that we used to do our calls several times a week with the team, because one person was in Portland, the other one was in Sacramento, and I'm here in Phoenix. That that we were getting a little worried, and we said, trust the process. And fortunately, at 19 months, we got a huge PO, and that kind of helped launch us. So 18 to 24 months investment. You need a significant network, whether it's through LinkedIn, whether it's through your personal network. In fact, I'll do a quick little plug here. I just released our second book, our first book, which was called The Leader of Oz. And it has all of the management leadership tips that I learned and helped develop for the managing and leading through people programs. And we're on our third printing at the moment. So great, easy to read book. And it's done as a business parable. We just finished the other book that's released in November called Ready, Set, Get Hired. And what this book is it's really about how do you find clients, or how do you find a job using networks like LinkedIn. And the fifth one was that you have to, as I just mentioned, you have to have a book. You have to have a hardcover book that you can hand a CEO. It's probably been our best tool. Having a hardcover book, not softcover. My friends were very explicit about that you can hand a CEO. Most of them won't read it. It's just being able to physically have that really demonstrates that you're for real. So have the book. And then the sixth one that I've added was that you need partners. So don't try to do it yourself. And it's not just internal partners. We partnered with several other consulting firms to say, how can we fill the gaps that you have so you don't have to develop new content and material? You may have all the clients. Let's make you look even better to your clients. And it was reciprocal. We would bring them in as we needed them. They would bring us in as they needed our stuff. And it really worked out as a true win-win.
I love this because it's very systematic and very tactical. I mean, each of these 6 points is going to, it's going to sustain you for 24 months. It's going to get you into interviews that you may not otherwise be able to. If you have a consulting firm, you're going to be able to, like you said, to talk to CEOs. I just see each and every single one of these. You could almost outline a system, and I know you probably have, but you can almost outline a system you have 6 systems of each of these.
Yeah, and the other point I want to make here is the other thing that we learned is that most of us, even within Magna Leadership Solutions, with my 2 partners, Dr. Lacani and Marlene Lundy, one of the things that we found was that we want to work on the content and the development and so forth. And what you really need when you do the startup is you need to use the 80-20, but you need 80% has to be on business development, getting out there, doing the networking, talking to the people, and the other 20% has to do with content development. And typically, I think with most firms, it's usually the reverse. Like we want to hone your skills and all the different workshops that you have and develop new tools and assessments. And those are all great and you have to have them. But if you spend the 80% of the time there and not on the business development, eventually when 24 months comes, then you have to go get a job or a loan.
Yeah, no, I could imagine that. I want to get into, if you don't mind, for the remaining few minutes, if we could get into Magna Leadership Solutions. I know you have, you have a new Leading Forward Academy via Zoom. And so can you talk a little bit about Magna Leadership Solutions? And I know you said it helps small to medium businesses, but if somebody's listening, we have over 30,000 business leaders that listen to this. If somebody wants to, maybe they're looking for mentorship or they're looking at getting into leadership training for, their managers or leaders, how would they go about getting in touch with Magna Leadership Solutions?
Right. So thanks for this opportunity to do a little bit of the pitch. We have been running for the past several years we call our Leading Forward Academy. And if you go to magnaleadership.com, there's information about different things there. The full-blown academy is not going to show up there because it's a combination of all the stuff, but you can see all the different workshops and competency things that we have. So what it is it's a 6-month program. It's customizable. We've designed it in modules. We have several large companies that have used it to develop their leaders, as well as small to medium-sized organizations. And what it does is it's completely modular, so we can customize it for the people. We have one organization that wants it in 5 modules. Another one wants it in 9. The other one says our most important thing here is around critical thinking. So we want more on that. So we've designed it modularly. And the great thing about what has happened in the past 12 months is we've had to move that all from in-person to online. So we've got a full year of delivering this over Zoom very, very successfully with 3 big clients. So that I would start there. And then the other thing I would say is that many of the organizations that we work with have managers or leaders, as we started out our conversation here, Jason, about where they needed some higher degree of self-awareness. And also on the Magna Leadership site, or if you go to pqtrainingandcoaching.com, either one will get you to that page. We started about 5 months ago. We started delivering, it's called positive intelligence training. And I just finished applying for my certification. I'm waiting to hear for that after finishing that 6-month program. And really what it is it's a way to develop your mental fitness and your emotional intelligence in a very, very structured way. So if you go to that site, the PQ Training and Coaching, and you put your name and email, you'll instantly get an assessment that you can do. And within 10 minutes, you can evaluate yourself with regard to how strong your emotional or positive intelligence is. And it'll identify all of what Shirzad Shamin, who developed the program, calls your saboteurs, all the voices in your head that are getting in the way. So that's all free to take. I would encourage people to go to that site, because I think you'll learn a lot about yourself. And if you're interested in getting trained to do that, that's an easy one. That's just a 7-week course. We do those as well.
Yeah, you can go to magnaleadership.com, and then you have a tab on the top. It says new-PQ program.
Right.
And you can
thanks.
click on that. Dr. Gazzara, I want to, how would somebody, if they want to get Leader of Oz, if they want to get Ready, Set, Get Hired, how would they get those books?
Well, they're both available on Amazon, so that's probably the easiest way to do that. In fact, we have a site, leaderofoz.com. You can buy it directly from us. But I'm going to make a recommendation. For Amazon has gotten their on-demand printing so cheap that we can't even print them for the price that they're selling them for. So Amazon used to sell it for $20. I don't know what it is today. Last week, I think it was like $8 or something. I can't even print it and ship it for that. So just go to Amazon. And the other, I'll give a little bit of insight. We are finishing the audio version of The Leader of Oz with a voiceover artist in Chicago, and she has promised to have it done by the middle of March. So if you don't want to read the book, you can listen to the book sometime, hopefully by the end of March.
That's awesome. Dr. Gazzara, I appreciate you coming on the ABQ Business Podcast show. I appreciate your wisdom. I know you've spent years and years in studying this and teaching literally tens of thousands of managers and leaders. I know you're a master faculty member at University of Phoenix, and you've been teaching since 1996. That's a lot of years of just faithfully teaching leadership. And I appreciate you doing that, and I know the world's better for it. And I just want to thank you for coming on the show today.
It's been my pleasure. I hope I've given your listeners something valuable. And please feel free to connect with me either through the website, or you can write to me directly, kevin@magnaleadership.com. I'd love to have a conversation. No sales pitch, I promise, just to help you. How do you even think through starting up a leadership program to shift your culture so you can work across cultures?
That's awesome. Thank you, sir.
All right. Bye now.
Thank you for joining us on the Albuquerque Business Podcast. And thanks to our sponsor, RigbyDigital.com. Make sure to subscribe and share. And go to abqpodcast.com. Get show notes, resources, and links to everything we talked about today to help you navigate your journey as an entrepreneur and business owner.